Okay, and we are live. So, thank you so much for anyone who's joining me live on LinkedIn or on YouTube as well. This is casting. So, for those who don't know me, my name is Matt Smead. I am a business psychologist and the founder of the Working Well community, which I'll tell you all about a little bit more about very shortly. So I thought I'd jump on the live stream today to talk to you about something that I'm really excited about. I've been posting about it. If you follow me, you've probably seen lots of my excited posts about this particular topic. The 9 Habits of Effective Wellbeing Leaders framework. So I want to talk to you about kind of what it is, where it came from, why I think it matters and why it's important. Plus, if you can stick around to the end, give away a few freebies related to it as well so that you can see how your skills tie into this 9 habits framework. So I'll mention all that as we go through. So again, as I'm going through, anyone who's watching, please feel free to drop any questions in the comments. If you're watching this on record, which I will make available to all of my connections and of course the people within my wellbeing community, then again, reach out to me, ask any questions. I'd love to. I want to create a dialogue around this, to be perfectly honest. That's what we're trying to do. That's the main premise of creating the habits framework in the first place. So just quickly before I dive in, I'll tell you one more thing. So I'm currently sat here in my home. It's absolutely freezing. It is about a foot of snow outside. So you might see my wife popping up in the background at some point because she's got a snow day. And talking about well-being, is there anything better for your well-being than a snow day? Absolutely not. The kids, unfortunately for them, but fortunately for me, their school is still open, so there will not be a herd of elephants somewhere in the background. They are currently at school in the foot of snow. How long that'll last, I'm not too sure. But like I said, I just wanted to take this time today just to kind of talk you through this kind of 9 habits framework, tell you why I think it's really important, and answer any questions that people have got as well, because again, I'm really excited about it, but it's that dialogue that's really, really important. So let's dive in. And I wanted to start with this slide here, or this idea here. 2025, I am dubbing the year of the well-being leader. Now, why am I saying that? The reason I'm saying that is because, and again, I'll get onto this, but I speak to lots of different people who do well-being leadership internally within all sorts of different organizations, industries, any industry you can think of. And I speak to them about the role, when you think about dedicated well-being leadership roles, a role which is still, crazily as it sounds, in its relative infancy. That sounds mad for me to say, and it sounds difficult for me to hear because I've worked in this space for so long that I think dedicated well-being leaders have always been around, but you've only got to go back 5, 10, certainly 15 years, and a dedicated well-being leader role, did that exist? Probably not. Certainly not the diverse kind of different types of wellbeing leadership roles that we see now. Those spun out of HR, out of occupational health and safety, out of all these different areas. So it's still in its relative infancy, this idea of the wellbeing leader. And we created the Working Well community, which I'll flip onto. I'll come back to the word, the wellbeing leadership year in a second. But we created the Working Well community to shine a light on that community of amazing wellbeing leaders. So the mission of the community itself is to, it's 2 things really. For individuals, it's about helping them be the best wellbeing leaders they can possibly be on an individual basis and for their businesses and their companies. From a kind of more societal perspective, it's about enhancing the role of the wellbeing leader. I worked in lots of these different organizations that saw these amazing wellbeing leaders doing amazing things. And I just thought to myself, someone needs to connect you. Someone needs to connect you to one another because, rather than paying for example, and I'm doing myself out of some work here, rather than paying for external consultants to come in and tell you how you should do things, instead, why are you not just talking to other companies, other people doing a similar sort of role and sharing some of that wealth? So part of the community was about doing that. It was about connecting them to one another, allowing them to learn off one another, solve some problems, but also kind of really grow in their role. On a societal level, it was about enhancing that overall role of the wellbeing leader, legitimizing it, if you like. The wellbeing leadership role isn't just something that you tag on to your existing job. For many people, it is if not the dedicated part of their role, it's a really significant piece And we need to shine a light on that. So that's why we created the Working Well community in the first place. So if I flick back to what I said at the start, I'm obviously, having said all that, slightly biased, right? But the reason why I'm dubbing 2025 as the year of the Wellbeing Leader is because I spoke to lots of different people, particularly on like a podcast that I run as well. And one of the things that I heard, I asked people to get out their crystal ball and look into the future. What does the future of wellbeing leadership look like? And not everybody says this, but I did hear a few times that some people felt that the role of the wellbeing leader was essentially going to die out or die on the vine a little bit. Now that surprised me, so I asked them why that was. The reasoning behind it was, well, there was a couple of reasons. Number one was just based on what we see anecdotally, and I've seen a little bit of this. You've seen some really high-profile well-being leaders losing their positions, or moving into external consultancy, for example, which is an interesting one, but moving out of that industry. So that does beg the question: why is that happening, and is that worrying for the role itself? But the other thing that came up, and this is more from a kind of positive angle, I guess, is people would tell me, and I believe this, right, that well-being should be everybody's responsibility. Within a business, it shouldn't just be the well-being leader or the well-being manager, whatever you want to, the chief happiness officer, whatever they call themselves, who are responsible for this. We need everybody caring about well-being, from senior leaders through to the frontline employees. So therefore, we just want to imbue well-being into everybody's role. So some people were suggesting that if we do that, and if we just bring it into everybody's role, that therefore we don't need someone who's dedicated and responsible for this stuff. I completely disagree. I completely disagree with that. I get where they're coming from, and like I said, I agree in the sense that I think when it's done best, wellbeing leadership is done across the whole organization. However, if we think about IT, for example, just because everybody works on a computer doesn't mean that we don't need a head of IT. It doesn't mean that we don't need somebody who is, or a whole department possibly, that is responsible for looking at the strategy of this stuff, measuring data alongside, to track progress around well-being in people's roles, and to give some guidance as well, a central point of contact for all these other people that you want to bring well-being into their roles. Give them a central point of contact to connect with. So my take on it is that the dedicated role of the wellbeing leader, whilst it might change, and that's an interesting thing in itself, there's probably a whole other live session about that, whether it gets more subsumed into the world of health and safety, whether it continues to get, where does DEI sit alongside this, and things like ESG as well, for example. I think, when I speak to people, actually, there's probably no one best way of doing that. It's based on the organization and the people involved and finding what works best for you. But if we fast forward kind of 5-10 years, yes, the wellbeing leadership role might sit in different places and it might have a slightly different name or a job title, but I think it'll be more important than ever. And I think 2025 is the start of that. I think that actually we will see more dedicated wellbeing roles. Businesses are starting to see that there is a legal obligation around this. There is a moral obligation. It is also very good for business. If you want to attract the right people, then you need to be looking after the wellbeing of your employees. I'm preaching to the choir here, aren't I? I'll get off this point. But essentially, I think that a wellbeing leader is a crucial part of that, right? We need somebody who has that dedicated time, resource, and skill to be able to actually enhance that across the whole business, which kind of brings us onto our framework, which I'll move on to. If you're not a part of the Working Well community, by the way, let me put this fancy little QR code up. There we go. So let me show that in the top left-hand corner. If you're not a member of the Working Well community already, you can scan that QR code in the top left corner and you can join. And the best thing about the Working Well community is that it's completely free. So you can try it out. You can, we've got different types of members. You can either fully immerse yourself into it and talk to us every single day, or you can be, as somebody told me recently, you can be a lurker. You can just check it out. You can get all the free resources that are on there. It's completely free. There's no obligation. It's not salesy either. In fact, quite the opposite. We've got a value that you are not allowed to sell to other people within the Working Well community. So yeah, you're more than welcome to join that. And we'd love to see you on board soon. So where did the framework come from? The 9 habits of effective wellbeing leadership. The short version, the short answer to that question is from our podcast. Again, if you are not listening to the podcast, what are you even doing with your life? If you're in a wellbeing leadership role, the Working Wellbeing podcast is a great way to hear from your peers, to hear from people who are doing that role day in, day out. We're on season 3 now. That's not actually true. We're on like season 6 if you include the live events that we've done at things like the water cooler event and the Mad World Festival last year, where we took that pod that you can see on screen here and we went and interviewed people in person. But we also do online interviews as well. So we've interviewed tens of, is it 100? I wanted to say 100 there. It might be getting towards 100 of people who are, they've been there, done that, bought the t-shirt when it comes to wellbeing leadership. And the idea of the podcast is we want their unfiltered stories. We want their career journeys. We want to hear about how they got to where they got to today. It's really interesting because that tends to be very varied. You get some people who've, been a personal trainer with an interest in well-being, and that's moved them towards the health and well-being space, and then they've moved into the corporate world, and that's the way through. You've got psychologists like myself who have that interest in human behavior, and that's what's taken them into this role. You've got people from HR background, from occupational health. The interesting thing going forward will be whether we see more people who are kind of native well-being leaders. There are some health and well-being university courses, for example. So whether we'll start to see more people coming into that dedicated role right from the graduate status, that might be an interesting thing to see. But we ask wellbeing leaders about their career progress, how they got to where they got to, what were the good things that happened along the way, what were the challenges that they faced, and crucially, I started asking this question, and this is going back a few years now, what do they think the attributes of a successful and an effective wellbeing leader are? Now, I'll be totally transparent and honest with you. This was not some long-term plan to use the output of that to create a 9 habits framework. That wasn't even in my mind at the time. I was just interested. I just wanted to know from them, what do they think has been helpful in their own career, and what sort of advice would they give to others? And then about 6 months ago, I had this kind of light bulb moment where I was like, that's a load of interesting data, right? I'm a bit of a data geek. So that's a load of interesting data about what makes an effective wellbeing leader. Could we analyze that? And could we draw out some themes, which is where the framework came from? So what I went and had a look at was, who had we spoke to who'd particularly talked to us about these attributes of effective wellbeing leaders, and it brought up. So you can see those 21 people on screen here. That is not to say that the people who aren't included didn't have anything interesting to say. They absolutely did, and they were to a certain extent included within the analysis. But these were the 21 individuals, and you should check out some of these episodes, by the way. They're amazing, if I do say so myself. But where they really talk to me about what do they think makes an effective wellbeing leader. And as you can see, these individuals that you can see on screen, some of which have moved to different organizations now, but the organizations you can see are the ones that they were working for at the time. Real diverse group. So from different industries, from different organizations, like I said before, from different backgrounds, so all sorts of different stories that they brought to the table. But it was about, are there any themes in this? Are there any themes from this that we can distill out? So again, I would love to say that I did all the work around this, but ChatGPT did most of the heavy lifting. We transcribed and distilled these conversations down. So we had these hours and hours of interviews of wellbeing leaders talking about what makes them great and what makes other wellbeing leaders great. We distilled these conversations down, like I say, with the help of ChatGPT, and we were able to pull out 9 key themes or habits, if you like, that really capture the essence of what it takes to be a successful and effective wellbeing leader. I think there's a couple of important words there. Effective, probably, rather than successful. That's what we're looking for here. So success obviously should be a byproduct of being effective. But actually, these are the habits that we're saying will really allow you to have an impact in your role, to progress your career as a wellbeing leader, but possibly more importantly, if you are already working within an organization, really have an impact within that organization. And the second one is around habits. So we talk about skills and attributes here, but what I was most interested in are the habits. What are the things that people are doing day to day in terms of their behaviors? As you may know, something I'm really interested in is that knowledge and skills they're often overrated to a certain extent. So we might know everything there is to know when it comes to well-being leadership. You're an absolute expert in terms of you've read all the books, right? You might even have the skills to be able to put some of that into practice. But if these things aren't habits, if these things aren't something that you're doing almost automatically without thinking every single day, then the impact might not be that quite as great as you'd like it to be. So I'd like you to bear that in mind as you're having a look at the framework. Which of these do you do almost kind of habitually without thinking as part of your practice that you've developed over time and have become automatic? There might be some that you do really well already, which is amazing. There might be others that, even this LinkedIn Live today, gets you to stop and think, oh, maybe I could put a bit more effort into that, or have a look at how I could do that differently going forward. So let's have a look at the 9. Let's get into the 9. There's enough build up for you. So here's the 9. They're kind of on their side. Not very useful. So turn your head to give them a read. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move through each one of these in turn, and I should move that QR code as well, shouldn't I? Let me move that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move through each one of these 9. I'm going to have a look at each one in depth, tell you a little bit more about what I think that means in practice, what you could do, and then, like I say, leave you in a place where actually you can assess yourself against some of these attributes. So let's look at the first one. And the first one that came up was this idea of cultivating empathy and building relationships. Okay, so these are all words that I'm sure many of you will be accustomed to. You want to empathize with the people within your business that you're trying to improve the working lives of. Absolutely, seeing things from their perspective. Relationships, again, I'm biased. I run a community, so I think they're crucially important. And actually, relationships, I ummed and ahed about whether to have this as a separate habit, because this is something that, as we'll move through the other habit areas, you'll see this idea of connection and relationship comes into some of the other areas. So I'll get onto that as we go through. But in terms of a separate concern, this ability to cultivate empathy, build relationships within your business is the best way to kind of strengthen trust, but also really understand the people that you're trying to improve the working lives of. So the crucial part there is listening, right? Listening, and different mechanisms to do that. So, listening more than talking, which is easy for me to say as I'm yapping on here. But remember that you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. So, listening to people on the front line of your organization and what they need. Listening openly as well, trying not to be defensive. When you're telling them about this new wellbeing initiative that you're trying to launch, you'll know better than me that that's not always kind of received with completely open arms as much as you would like it to. So it can be really easy to get defensive about that. But actually, I'd encourage you to listen and think, why are people not that interested in this amazing wellbeing intervention that I'm trying to put in front of them? Perhaps it's something to do with the lack of time that they have, or that they just don't understand it and how it fits in with their job role day to day. So starting with empathy, and that's why we've got it as the first habit, starting with empathy, I think is probably, if you're going to rank them, one of the most crucial habits that a well-being leader, an effective well-being leader, would have. The second one, and this is a bit of a controversial one for me, mainly because I don't like the word. Okay, so demonstrating resilience and flexibility. And again, this is another one where I was like, do I even put that word resilience in? The reason why I didn't necessarily want to do that is because resilience has been hijacked, I feel, by certain organizations as an excuse for shifting responsibility for well-being onto the individual. So rather than fixing the workplace, instead, we just need to make you more resilient. You need to toughen up so that you can deal with some of the challenges that you're faced with. But the reason for including this was because we spoke to lots of different wellbeing leaders, like I say, from all these different industries, the 21 individuals that you saw before. And it kept on coming up time and time again that it can be a really tough role. Sometimes you can feel relatively lonely in your role. Maybe you're the only person who's dedicated to this within your business. And actually that ability to persist, through setbacks, to take setbacks along the way as well. Things won't always go to plan when it comes to your well-being strategy, but to be able to persist through that, but more importantly, perhaps to adapt, to say, well, that's not working, so let's try something else and see if that has the desired impact on the well-being of our workforce. The other crucial one that came into this is patience. And There's one interview that comes to mind for this, a guy called Robert Manson, who was previously the head of wellbeing at a couple of really big companies, RWE and Morrison's, to name a couple. You should check out his episodes. He talked a lot about patience. And what he meant by that was you get wellbeing leaders, and he was in this category where you are very passionate about what you do. Okay. You are living this day to day. You love well-being. You know the benefits that it can bring to the individuals within the business, but also the business itself. You've drunk the Kool-Aid, if you like, when it comes to well-being in the workplace. So you go out with all these amazing ideas and you want to change the culture overnight, and then you hit a few brick walls along the way. The exec team aren't coming along quite as fast as you would like. Frontline staff are they're not really engaging with it as much as you'd like. And it can be really easy to give up. What Robert was suggesting was that the key there is patience. The key is to play the long game, thinking to yourself that, and looking for the small wins along the way, even if there are a couple of chinks of light in terms of, I can see some positive progress here, using that rather than wanting to change everything overnight. So we put that within this idea of resilience and flexibility, because I think it's all about the well-being leader themselves managing their own well-being, but doing that over a period of time through things like flexibility, adaptability, but also patience as well. Brings us to number 3, linked to the last one: embrace long-term strategic planning. Again, I'm not going to talk to you too much about this, because I think most of you will get this, right? You don't want to be you don't want to be looking for quick fixes. Quick fixes are all right. If there are some quick fixes, some low-hanging fruit, please use them. But actually, to have a lasting impact with your well-being approach, you want a long-term strategy that really builds into the core of an organization's future, if you like. The one thing I would say about this, and this came from a conversation with a guy called Chris Jones, who at the time was head of wellbeing for the probation service in New Zealand. Again, one of the people that we spoke to on the podcast. He said not too long. Okay, now I actually worked with Chris when he was head of wellbeing at Network Rail here in the UK, and they had a 10-year strategy for wellbeing. Now, speaking to Chris 5-6 years on from that 10-year strategy, he was saying that that was too long. Essentially, that should have been maybe a 5-year strategy rather than a 10-year strategy. That how could you possibly know what the world looks like in a decade's time? So definitely play the long-term game, but maybe 10 years is a bit too far. So think about balancing that with some of your shorter vision goals as well. Number 4, and an area that is really close to my heart: focus on preventative, proactive well-being. I think the real kind of link here is between the word of well-being and that of health and safety. So thinking about psychological health and safety, and using some of the methodology that we see from health and safety to move into a more preventative space. So, for example, in health and safety, physical, if you were going to do a risk assessment, you'd do 3 things. You'd say, number 1, what are the hazards? What are the things that are out there that could cause me harm? Do I need to climb a ladder? Do I need to hold some hazardous materials, for example? Number 2, how does that convert to risk? So how likely is this to cause an issue for me? And if it did, how hurt would I get? So how likely is that I fall off the ladder? And if I did, how bad would it be? So number 3, based on that, you put control measures in place. So the control measures, they can be in a number of different areas. It might be that you're trying to eliminate the risk entirely. Do I need to go up the ladder in the first place, or could I avoid that? Maybe I'm just going to mitigate against the risk. I do need to go up the ladder, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to wear the harness and get someone to hold the bottom of it for me and have the right training, for example. And then there's always responding to the risk. It's inevitable. You can't eradicate hazard and risk entirely. But, so do I know where to go to and what help I can get if I do fall off the ladder? I think it's taking that same sort of mindset when it comes to psychological health and well-being. So yes, we need some of the response things, your employee assistance programs, your counseling services, these sorts of things, the things that you can use to respond to a risk or an issue that somebody's had around their mental health or well-being. But actually, what about all the stuff that comes before that? Could we identify some of the hazards that might be present within your business? And by psychological hazards, you want to have a look at the ISO 45003 standard. I'm talking about workplace pressures, like how much demands people have, the resources they have to do their jobs, the relationships that they have, their relationship with their manager, for example, these sorts of things. Identifying and looking at some of those potential hazards, and then looking at what risk does that pose for individuals. Now, there's a little bit of a difference here when we're talking psychological to physical. So for example, the main difference being that they affect people in different ways, or more diverse ways. So 100 people fall off a ladder, 100 people get hurt. Whereas if 100 people work a 16-hour day, 10 of them might be fine. They might say, I'd work even longer hours if you'd let me. But there are certainly read acrosses between this. And to come back to the habit, I think those well-being leaders that we spoke to that really understood what are the things that we can do upstream to take a preventative approach to well-being, to first and foremost reduce harm, but also to positively influence environments at almost a job design level. They were the ones that saw the best outcomes. So focusing on preventative well-being, really key. Number 5, this is one that I could rabbit on for ages, but I won't because I'm running out of time. Leverage data for decision making. I said at the start, I am a data junkie. Data it can come in lots of different forms. You can have quantitative data, your surveys. It could be sickness absence measures. We talk about this idea of leading and lagging measures of well-being. So your leading measures or your leading indicators, if you like, for well-being might be your engagement survey. It might be the conversations that you're hearing across the business. What are the things that you're hearing right now that might indicate an issue with well-being in the future? And then you've got your lagging, what we call lagging indicators. So that's your sickness absence levels, your levels of presenteeism, your retention figures. How attractive you are to new employees. Are you bringing in the right talent, for example? And I think the leaders, again, that we spoke to that use all of this data in a joined up way to not only kind of tell them what was going on, but to help them make decisions, they, for me, tended to be the most effective. And I think, by the way, and this links into the next habit, AI could be really helpful for that. Now, AI, from a data perspective, I think, can be helpful in a number of different ways in terms of analyzing huge amounts of data very quickly, particularly if you're thinking about qualitative data. You've got email text, or you've got messages between people, you've got open comments on your surveys. AI can pull themes out of that really quickly, which I think is a really potentially really useful thing going forward. But linking into this next habit, it can also help us to personalize and respond to the needs of individuals. Now, before AI, that might have been quite a difficult thing to do because you're dealing with every single individual. How do you possibly do that as a well-being leader? I think there are some really interesting tools, and now you can get pointed towards these within some of the resources that we've got that can help out with that. But the other thing, a broader point around personalizing, is I'm a huge advocate of this idea of human-centered design. Making sure that any intervention that you put together and that you plan within your business and through your practice is co-created with the people that you are creating that with, right? So not sitting in a dark room and deciding on your own that this is what our people need because I've decided and some other leader has decided that's what they need. Speak to them. This comes back to the empathy, right? Speak to them, listen to them, and respond to those needs in the most personalized way you can do. Whiz through these last 3. Number 7, develop leadership skills and mentor others. This was another one from Chris Jones, particularly sticks in my head. When I was asking him about the skills required, he said he did an MBA, so you might be an absolute subject matter expert when it comes to health and well-being, and that's okay. But what do you know about the life and the work of your finance director, of your operations director, for example? If you don't know much about the challenges that they're facing and the things that they're doing day to day, how can you possibly communicate with them in a way that's going to influence them? It becomes very difficult. So invest in your own leadership skills, not just in the space of health and well-being, but broader than that. Number 8 is applying positive psychology. I guess this is just a flip side. This is the other side of the coin from the reduction of harm that I talked about before. So I think reduction of harm is a really solid starting point. You want to start by eradicating all the hazards and designing a workplace where people are able to thrive. But then habit 8 is about what you're doing to actually see that help people to thrive, right? Drive that purpose, that optimism, that pride in everyday life that people will have. And this comes from the world of positive psychology. And again, the wellbeing leaders that we spoke to that really stuck out to me in terms of their effectiveness I heard a lot of that positive psychology coming through. And then finally, we're going to finish up with community because that's the important one, right? As I run a community myself, but integrating across functions. As I said before, it's similar to that thing I mentioned with Chris Jones. You need to be able to speak the language of other people within your business, not just seeing well-being as this thing that sits on its own. How do you communicate that across your organization? Great well-being leaders, they build a brand for this, brand for this stuff, whether that's their personal brand in terms of themselves as a well-being leader, but also their brand for their well-being approach across a whole business. And leveraging things like champion networks, employee resource groups, unions, even that came up in a couple of the conversations that we had, to be able to increase the impact that you're having as a well-being leader. So there's a whistle-stop tour of the 9. So I've whizzed through them, obviously, quite quickly there. If you want to know more about these 9 habits, to learn a little bit more about them, to assess yourself against these skills, but also to access, and I'll finish up with this in my final slide in a second, to access a free course related to the 9 habits, the QR code below is where you want to start, right? So you can scan that. Well, so there's 2 routes into this. You can scan the QR code below. You can try our 9 habits assessment. You can rate yourself against those 9 areas that I've just mentioned. And then what that will do is that will lead you towards our community that I mentioned earlier. The second thing that you could do, and I'll bring that QR code back in the top left-hand corner, is that you could just join the community. And the reason for joining the community is not only because you will get more content from me and others related to this 9 habits assessment, but crucially, you will be able to access the Wellbeing Leadership Playbook course that you can see at the top there. Now, this is a free course available for anyone who is in our Working Well community. It allows you to learn more about the 9. There are practical hints, tips, techniques. You can feedback. You can write your own experiences of these 9 areas within the course itself and get feedback on that from your peers within the community. So you can do all that sort of good stuff. But the really key bit there is we've also clipped the interviews that you saw from those podcasts I mentioned earlier, so that you can actually hear the people talking, not just me telling you about these 9. You're taking it from me that these exist right now, right? But when you have a look at some of the video clips, you'll hear those well-being leaders, the people who are doing it day to day, talk about these 9 firsthand. The slide that you're seeing here is a bit of a sneak peek into the future as well. So next week I'm doing another LinkedIn Live to talk all about the Wellbeing Leader Accelerator course, which you can see there in the red box. So that has been built. That is launching in February. If you want to find out more about that, contact me, go into the community. There's loads on there, but also I'm running another LinkedIn Live next week. But in the future, the idea is that we also want to build some more advanced leadership certificated courses around this area as well. If we go back to our mission, how do we enhance the role of the wellbeing leader and help people to be the best wellbeing leaders they can be? We believe that this can play a really key part in that. There's your whistle-stop tour of the 9 habits assessment. I hope you enjoyed today. Feel free to comment below. I'll be sharing the recording of this, obviously. As I said at the very start, I want it to be a dialogue. We've started with these 9, but if you can convince me that perhaps there's a 10th that I've missed, or perhaps maybe one of the 9 shouldn't be in there, I am all ears. I am willing to listen. Let's make this a dialogue within the community so that we can start to build this together into the future and make 2025 the year of the wellbeing leader. On that note, I'm going to finish up. Enjoy the rest of your day.